Hello and welcome to Inside Judicial Watch. I'm your host, Amelia Kane, and I'm sitting down with Jim Peterson, one of our senior attorneys. Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amelia. It's my pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, I'm here to talk to you today about the recent press release we sent out regarding the Ukraine and Biden case. Now, what led up to this? Can you go ahead and give us the developments for this?
Well, sure. As Judicial Watch does, we're doing the real investigative work into the real Ukraine scandal. Our press release related to one of the recent lawsuits we filed several, trying to get at the heart of the real scandal of what happened in Ukraine. Our lawsuit seeks records from the State Department concerning communications and all sorts of documents concerning what was going on back in the 2014-2016 period in terms of collaboration between the Obama administration and even the Clinton campaign and people in Ukraine.
Wow, so who is Victor Shogun exactly?
Sure, one of the targets of our request is a man in Ukraine named Viktor Shogun, who was a prosecutor. Now, he was the man that Joe Biden at this point famously leaned on the Ukrainian government to get fired. And the reason that is important is because at that same time, Joe Biden's son, of course, was on the board of a Ukrainian company that was being investigated by that prosecutor. So when we're talking about Ukrainian corruption and Ukrainian collusion, that is the real story.
Yeah, that is where the corruption lies, certainly. Now, why are we going after Shokin exactly? Are we going after Shokin?
No, we're trying to find out what was going on in terms of why Joe Biden was leaning on them. We think, because of the connection with his son and the company and the corrupt arrangement there. And we're trying to find out the larger universe of what was going on. Why was an American vice president calling up and leaning and threatening to withhold aid to the Ukrainian government because of a local prosecutor in Ukraine? Seems like a very strange thing for the vice president to be focused on. And we're trying to learn more about that. We're doing that through our work, our investigative work, because, frankly, nobody else is. The Congress isn't doing it, sadly, and it was Donald Trump that was asking the Ukrainian government to do this during the now famous phone call, because he wanted to know, quite legitimately, what was going on back then. That was what he was asking to be investigated, and we're now trying to do the work because nobody else will.
So, could you say that Trump is being the whistleblower in this?
In some sense, that's true, actually. Of course, the media isn't going to portray it that way. The media portrays the president as, being corrupt and attempting to collude with a foreign government and attack his opponents. That is not the actual story at all. There is a collusion story in Ukraine, but it wasn't Donald Trump attempting to interfere with American elections by colluding with a foreign government. It's what the collusion story happened back in 2014, and in that era, when the Obama administration and the Vice President Joe Biden were deeply involved in Ukrainian matters, and they were the ones that were attempting to collude and did collude with persons in Ukraine that tried to affect the 2016 election. Mm-hmm. That was what was being investigated. It needs to be investigated. It's what we're trying to do now. It's what the president was asking the new Ukrainian government to do now, and it still needs to be done.
Now, to recap for our viewers, if we can backtrack, why exactly is Judicial Watch suing for these documents from the State Department? Because
we need to be able to get the real documents from our government to further this investigation. As I said, nobody else is doing this, unfortunately. Amazingly, the Congress should be, but it is not. This is the tool that we use is our legal work, our Freedom of Information Act lawsuits to uncover these kinds of documents. That's how we compel the State Department, because they won't otherwise, through the court system, we compel the State Department to provide these documents. And we hope, and we expect in this case, that there are documents sitting there in the State Department that will shed a lot of light on this. And that's why we have gone to court again to try to get them.
Now, why was Viktor Shogun fired?
Well, that's the interesting question, and we hope to learn more about that. The former Vice President Biden claims that Viktor Shogun was an individual that was deeply corrupt, because Vice President Biden was against corruption, he was concerned and he was trying to compel the Ukrainian government to do this. Okay. Now, as I said before, it seems kind of strange that he's taking that kind of interest in local politics in Ukraine to that degree. So we're trying to understand that better, because there's something there that is certainly we need to know more about. Now, the real story probably is that at that time, that prosecutor was investigating a company called Burisma, a natural gas company in Ukraine. And on the board of directors of that company, just so happens, was the vice president's son.
Hunter Biden.
Hunter Biden, exactly. Now, Hunter Biden, as you probably know, had a real sweetheart deal. He was getting paid $50,000 a month to be on the board of that company. That's a good day's work. The law firm he was associated with, Hunter Biden was associated with, was getting millions of dollars of compensation from that company. So, one could more than reasonably ask, well, if that prosecutor is investigating corruption related to that company, and then that prosecutor gets fired because of the Vice President of the United States, I mean, there's something going on there. It's classic influence peddling. We know this, we recognize this, and that's what we need to get to. That's what we're trying to do through our work. So.
Mm-hmm. And I remember you saying that no other news agency is covering this. Why do you think that is? Because this seems like a pretty big scandal.
Well, the mainstream media, for reasons we can all speculate about, wants to focus on the particular things that the particular agenda that they have at the moment. They want to attack the president again by saying, so something here that the president did wrong and is impeachable. So they're all they want to talk about is that, and a phone call that he made to the president of Ukraine. Nobody else is investigating this. The mainstream media won't. Congress, which has a constitutionally ordained oversight role, is not doing it. The House of Representatives, of course, controlled by the Democrats, isn't going to do it. Sadly, the Senate seems to have little interest in it. But a lot of the pieces are already out there. I mean, I would suggest to the viewers to take a look at a book that was recently published authored by a former federal prosecutor named Andrew McCarthy, who's often on Fox. He also writes for National Review, and he puts together a lot of the pieces here, to talk about the much broader perspective of what was going on, not just in Ukraine, but also in Russia, and how all this kind of came together back in the 2016 election, and is now continuing to play out. What we're trying to do is to get even more so that it's clear that people understand, and we can show that the real scandal here is the collusion of not the president with Russians or Ukrainians or anyone else, but the scandal of the collusion of the Obama administration and the Clinton campaign with Russia and now Ukraine. That's what we're trying to get at.
Now, you keep on bringing up Russia. Is this just another piece in the Russiagate saga?
It really is. I mean, we've now had years of the media and the Democrats telling us about how Donald Trump was in bed with the Russians and trying to influence the election. What was really going on is now coming out, partly through our work and elsewhere, is that way back before the 2016 election, it was the Democrats that were deeply involved in Russia and in Ukraine. Now we know that the Russia collusion hoax has been exposed. We know that there was nothing there. There wasn't any collusion with Donald Trump. It was the Clinton campaign that used a fabricated dossier of Christopher Steele and turned that into the whole multi-year Mueller investigation, again, to try to attack and discredit the president. But now, when that's failed, there's another collusion narrative we're hearing about, and they're trying to impeach the president over. It's allegedly Ukraine, but what was really going on there is, you might remember, or viewers might remember, back in 2014, there was a change in government in Ukraine. Supposedly a pro-Russian leader of Ukraine was replaced by another, and the Obama administration was very happy about this at the time. But that prior Ukrainian government leader worked closely with, later to become the campaign manager of the Donald Trump campaign, by name of Paul Manafort. He was closely associated with that Ukrainian leader, okay? So when that new government came in Ukraine, they were very unhappy that Donald Trump had a new campaign manager of Paul Manafort. They worked very closely with the Clintons and the DNC in providing information about Manafort to try to discredit him and Donald Trump and anything associated with him. And that's how this story began. The Ukraine story has been going on for a long time. It's only recently that the Democrats decide to focus on a phone call where the president is quite legitimately asking for help and trying to understand fully what was going on back then.
Which he should. He's the president.
Absolutely. He's the chief law enforcement officer of the country. That's his constitutional duty. But there are a lot of things about what was going on back in Ukraine back at the time. They tried to, and they did take out Manafort as the Clinton campaign manager and led to his prosecution, even though he was doing the same thing that Democrats were doing at the time. That was the real collusion story. But media doesn't want to focus on that. The Democrats don't want us to focus on that. They want to talk about this last piece now. But the real story here is collusion in Ukraine, not by the president, but by the Democrats and the DNC and the media as the willing conspirators with them.
Yeah, what you're saying is just such a bombshell. Trump was not colluding with Ukraine and Russia. It was the DNC.
Exactly. For whatever reasons, we can guess what it is, they don't want that investigation to go on. They don't want any light to be shown on not just what the travels of Joe Biden and his interest in people's jobs in Ukraine, which is a significant part of it, but it was even broader than that. I mean, it was their work to try to take down they tried and they succeeded in taking out Paul Manafort in the Trump campaign. After that happened, some of those documents were illegally leaked in Ukraine at that time. A court in Ukraine has subsequently said that the actions of those Ukrainians were an attempt to illegally influence an American election. That's what was going on back in 2016. There was an attempt to influence the election, but it was people that were working with the Democrats in Ukraine that were trying to do that.
Can you repeat this for our viewers just one more time?
Absolutely. There were persons working with the DNC in the Clinton campaign in Ukraine back prior to the 2016 election. They provided a variety of documents illegally about Manafort and in an attempt to target him in the Trump campaign, which they didn't like because Manafort had worked for the prior Ukrainian government, for better or worse. And after that happened, since then, a court in Ukraine has said that the attempt to turn over that information and those documents was specifically an attempt to influence the American election. And that is what was going on. It was collusion by people that were working in support of the Democrats. And not surprisingly now, when we try to learn more about all this and to fully explain it, because it's a story that's a little complicated, but is very important to be told. You know, the Democrats don't want to launch an impeachment inquiry so that there isn't any investigation or any discussion of what was really going on. These things are important to understand the full context, not just what happened in a phone call that the president made, but to understand how we got here. The collusion was real. The collusion was by the Democrats.
Now, our president, Tom Fitton, has said that this is a coup and not an impeachment inquiry. Why is that?
Well, because, first of all, as people have noticed, the procedures that are being followed, the Democrats in the House are anything but the normal impeachment procedures that have developed over the years. They're having secret closed-door hearings. They refuse to have a vote to authorize whatever they're doing. So first of all, it's very improper from that perspective. And while they're doing this, they're doing that, and it really is more of an attempt at a coup, because instead of going through the regular processes, they're trying once again to take out the president. From the very beginning of this administration, right when he took office, there have been Democrats in the House calling for the president's impeachment. I mean, for any number of reasons or no reasons at all. They just say, we're going to impeach this guy. And when they finally took control after the last midterm election in the House, they've ramped up those efforts. There's one Democrat presidential candidate, the billionaire candidate, that's been running campaign commercials for years saying, impeach the president. And this is a long-term effort for no particular reason other than the politics to impeach him. And that's why in many respects it is an attempt at a coup, and as opposed to a proper procedure to judge whether the president has committed some sort of an act that is worthy under the law of impeachment.
And of course, you would say that this is an attack on the president.
Oh, absolutely. We all recognize that this is politics. The Russia collusion theory didn't work. They spent years on that. So they've said, oh, forget about this. Let's come up with something. Let's move over to Ukraine. Oh, that's very serious. Let's impeach him for that. I mean, they're looking for something, and they just wanted they want him out of office one way or the other, and that's what they're trying to do. So.
They're trying anything right.
Right.
And I'm sure our viewers are just still stunned as to how the Democrats were the ones colluding with Russia and Ukraine and not President Trump, because like what you said, we've been hearing this from many media sources.
Sure. I mean, the true story here just doesn't get out. The willful blindness, the willful unwillingness to give the complete picture of what the real collusion story is just amazing. There was collusion in a variety of ways, but it was by the Democrats, the DNC, the Clinton campaign, and the Obama administration that we're working with. First, it was Russia and Ukraine, and while they were doing this on the way, Joe Biden was, enriching his son on his world tour, of influence peddling. So those are the real stories here, but all we're hearing about is, whatever they want mud they throw at the president on any particular day. So.
This is just very disturbing. Now, where does Judicial Watch go from here in this case?
Well, we're going to work aggressively, as we always do, through the courts to pry this information out of the State Department. As we've seen through the Trump administration, the State Department, as well as other agencies, actively work to undercut the president. So we have to force this information out of the agency, and we will through the courts. We've done this for many years now. and we're going to find the true story.
And Judicial Watch is just spearheading this effort.
Yes, we are. And it seems to many of us that we don't always understand why we have to be in the lead, but we're happy to, and we will continue to be.
Well, thank you, Jim. And thank you for tuning in into Inside Judicial Watch. If you enjoyed this video, please visit our website, donate to our work, and find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you.